Today we're at Kamp Amersfoort and I'm going to walk you guys through all the cruelties which took place here. The Holocaust had quite a big impact on Europe, and today we've had the privilege of walking through and filming at one of these sites, Kamp Amersfoort. After the Nazi invasion of the Netherlands, Kamp Amersfoort became a place of suffering. Prisoners would have to endure extreme labor, starvation, and they were in a state of constant fear. Kamp Amersfoort wasn't just a labor camp, it was also a transit camp. And what this means is that a lot of prisoners from Kamp Amersfoort would be brought to either concentration camps in Germany or in Poland. Once you arrived at Kamp Amersfoort, you will probably be kicked in and yelled in by the guards to go into the camp, where your head would be shaved bald, you would be given an old German or Dutch uniform, and you would be given a prisoner number. The camp was parted in two sections. One section is where the SS lived. They would have a sleeping barracks, offices, garages, storage units, and they would also have a bunker underground where either prisoners which had an extreme likelihood of escaping or prisoners who were to be executed the next day would be kept. On the other side, you would have a prisoner section. A prisoner section, of course, where they would have to work, the appel, and the sleeping barracks. Furthermore, one of the only remnants of the prisoner section was a watchtower. So this is one of the remnants which was left over from the original Kamp Amersfoort. It's a watchtower, and in total they would have 8 of these, and this one is the only one left. The prisoner section also had something which was called the Rose Garden. This will be the Rose Garden, and the name might sound quite pleasant, but of course it's a concentration camp still. This will be used as a punishment for prisoners who weren't in time for the parade. So what they would do is they would form a line and you'd have to be there. If you were too late, you could be punished with the Rose Garden. And what you would have to do is you would walk in here. This would be a 3-meter wide section, and you would just have to stand. Regardless of the weather, the wind, the conditions and whatnot, you could have to stand here for either hours or maybe even days. And if you were to move, even the slightest bits, you could be punished with having to stand even more. The prisoners would call this the Rose Garden as kind of a mockery name, and this is because of the barbed wire over here. Prisoners would say that it would look like roses, and one of the former prisoners here actually drew a logo with roses and barbed wire, which the concentration camp or the camp still uses as its logo to this day. Considering I live near this camp, I have been taught a lot of different stories about World War II, and actually on my elementary school we had like 6 entire months dedicated to just World War II. And of course, a bunch of it would be used on Kamp Amersfoort as well, considering, I live near it. Anyhow, one of the stories which actually stuck with me quite well was a story about 101 Soviet prisoners of war arriving at the station of Amersfoort, and they had to be marched to Kamp Amersfoort. Now the Germans would try 2 things, and let's just start off with the first thing. The Soviets were forced in ragged clothing to make them look more dehuman, basically, and they were to be marched to Kamp Amersfoort. And this would serve as an attempt to try and dehumanize the Soviets and try to rally the Dutch behind their war effort, basically. Anyhow, what were to happen instead was the citizens of Amersfoort actually, they didn't like it, of course, so they started throwing bread to the Soviet prisoners of war in their attempt at solidarity towards the Soviet soldiers. Also, what happened was, once they arrived at the camp, the Germans, of course, didn't like it, because their little attempt at humiliating the Soviet prisoners of war had failed. They wanted to do something else. They were starving the Soviet prisoners of war, they had to do immense labor, and they just had to work very, very hard. To the point that, they were basically just starving. And that's when they took a lot of cameras, they were pointing it at the Soviets, and they just threw bread at them and cigarettes, in the hope that the Soviets were to fight among themselves for the bread, for the little bread which they had, But the opposite actually happened. The Soviets actually divided the bread and the cigarettes amongst themselves, and another piece of propaganda was failed. Now, when I was looking at this story online, it was to my surprise that I actually had remembered it quite well, because everything I just told you was from a memory which was taught to me back when I was 12 years old, maybe 11 years old, and right now I'm 20, so that's like 9 years ago. So it was quite fun to actually see that most of it I remembered quite well. Anyhow, let's continue. Of the 101 Soviet prisoners of war who would arrive at the station of Amersfoort, 24 of them would die by maltreatment due to abuse within the first 6 months. Even a person at Kamp Amersfoort, Nico van Nieuwenhuizen, actually had 2 Soviet prisoner skulls on his desk to try to show the racial superiority of the Aryans compared to the Soviets. Reinhard Heydrich would say that the Soviet prisoners of war were not to serve any purpose anymore and that they were to be executed. The Soviet prisoners of war were told that they were to be relocated to the warmer south of France, and they were put on buses. In reality, they were driven 300 meters down the road and executed there. The Soviets weren't the only one getting executed. In 1941, the camp started to dig out a path, and the sand which was dug up was put to the sides. This path would be used by the guards to target practice, but also to execute condemned criminals. This day you can walk on this path and take a moment to think about all the horrifying stuff which happened here. At the end of the road, they placed a monument. This statue, the stone man, represents the prisoners of Kamp Amersfoort and their inability to change anything about their fortune. During the later stages of the war, Germany was running out of manpower, and sometimes these men would work in the factories and they were to become soldiers. But that would leave a gap in the factories, so they would try to recruit from the conquered territories. So the Benelux, France, Poland, the Baltic countries, the Mediterranean countries, and so on and so forth. Sometimes even allied countries would have to send men to work in these factories. And once the volunteers started to run dry, they would force people. These were often young men who would be kidnapped to a foreign country and were forced to work. One of these people included a relative of mine who was actually hiding from the Germans in an attempt not to have to go to Germany to do forced labor. However, then at some point the Germans started to threaten to take his father, and then he just went there. Worker conditions were often quite horrible, and a lot of these people who were to be forced to work in Germany were transited from Kamp Amersfoort. At their height, they would have a little over 3,500 prisoners registered in a single day. One of the ways you can commemorate these people is by going to the site of Kamp Amersfoort and taking a look through the casualty list. This will be a list with the names of several people, a lot of people actually, the way they died and the date they died. You can have a look at it. It's honestly quite horrifying to look at, but it's very important to keep in mind what all these people went through so we can prevent this from happening in the future. On the 1st of January 1945, the Germans were going to do something which was called the Appel. And this was actually quite common. They would have to do this every single day. Sometimes an Appel was to take multiple hours. It doesn't really matter in what kind of weather, windy conditions, whatnot. And the prisoners would just have to stand there in line. Well, in 1945, the 1st of January, they were to have to stand there, and due to 2 prisoners actually having escaped, a lot of prisoners, I believe roughly 100 if I recall correctly, were getting physically abused and tortured. A lot of people that day were seriously hurt and within an inch of their life. And during this Appel on the 1st of January 1945, people were beaten with sticks, they were kicked and they were punched repeatedly over and over again, and they would have to stand there for 5 hours. Still, don't move, otherwise you could be punished with the Rose Garden. The first casualty of Kamp Amersfoort was Mr. Alexander Morgendorf. He was a merchant in Amsterdam, and at the time of his passing, he was only 44 years old. He was also, coincidentally, the first casualty of the raid in Amsterdam on the 22nd of February 1941. Like him, thousands of other people will meet the cruel same end, either by starvation, execution, or in the desperate attempt to escape. If you found this video informative, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel, as I see a lot of you are not yet. Make sure to leave a like and a comment what you thought about the video. This will really help me with the YouTube algorithm, and make sure to spread my videos out there. I thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.